You weren't born confused. The world just taught you to hide the most powerful part of yourself. The part that was too honest, too angry, too bold, too real. But what if that hidden part, the one you buried, is actually your purpose trying to speak? The answers you've been chasing might live inside the very side of you who are afraid to look at. You weren't born confused. You didn't come into this world doubting yourself. You laughed when you wanted to. You cried when something hurt. You said what you felt, without asking if it was too much. But little by little, the world told you which parts of you were acceptable and which parts needed to disappear. So you began to hide, not because you were weak, but because you were smart. You learned that certain emotions made people uncomfortable. You were told not to get angry, not to cry in public, not to speak unless you had something nice to say. And every time you followed those rules, you earned approval, praise, safety. But something else happened, too. The parts of you that didn't fit those rules, they didn't go away, they went underground. Carl Jung called this hidden part of the self the shadow. It's made up of all the traits, desires, and emotions you were told not to have. The parts of you that were too intense, too emotional, too ambitious, too different. So you buried them, but they didn't die. They started showing up in other ways, through anxiety, through shame, through relationships that feel like cycles you can't break. You start to notice it, that strange feeling when someone says something and it stings a little too much. That overreaction you can't explain. That dream you keep having, over and over, with no logic but deep emotion. That's your shadow, not broken, not evil, not dangerous, just ignored. Jung believed that your shadow isn't trying to hurt you. It's trying to help you become whole, because what you reject about yourself usually holds the thing you're here to do, that fear you've pushed down. It might be a signal, that shame you carry. It might hold the story someone else needs to hear. You've spent years shaping yourself into what others needed. But now, those pieces you buried, they're knocking. Not for attention, but for integration. And the longer you ignore them, the more they run your life from behind the scenes. You think you're in control. But if you've never faced your shadow, you're not choosing, you're reacting. Ever wonder why some people trigger you instantly? Why you feel jealous, insecure, or small? Out of nowhere. That's not just emotion. That's a message your shadow is speaking. The only question is, will you finally listen? Carl Jung didn't describe the shadow as evil. He described it as human. It's the side of you that doesn't get a seat at the table. The part of you that wasn't acceptable, not by society, not by your parents, not by the version of yourself you were told to become. The shadow is made in moments of silence, when a child speaks with passion and is told to calm down, when someone cries and is told to toughen up, when anger is punished, when creativity is laughed at, when mistakes are shamed. In those moments, you don't just feel hurt. You learn a lesson. This part of me is not allowed. So you split. You create a version of yourself the world will accept. And you hide the rest. But that hidden part doesn't disappear. It sinks into your unconscious. That's the shadow. And here's the strange part. The stronger your mask becomes, the louder your shadow gets. Because the shadow isn't passive. It moves. It stirs. It acts even when you don't realize it. It shows up in your relationships, in your triggers, in the roles you chase, in the people you attract, in the patterns you can't seem to break, no matter how hard you try. You might call it bad luck or just how I am. But what if it's your shadow pulling the strings? Jung believed that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will control your life, and you'll call it fate. Think about that. How many decisions have you made, not out of choice, but out of fear? How many times have you held back, not because you wanted to, but because something inside said, "Don't go there." That's the shadow, not punishing you, just protecting the version of you that had to survive. But you're not that version anymore. You don't need to hide behind perfection. You don't need to shrink to be loved. You don't need to be soft just to feel safe, because the purpose of shadow work isn't to become someone else. It's to bring back the parts of you that were never broken, only buried. And when you do, you begin to feel something rare, wholeness. You don't always see your shadow, but you feel it. It shows up in the moments you least expect, and the moments you regret the most. Like snapping at someone you care about for something small, feeling jealous even when you pretend you're not, getting defensive before they've even finished their sentence. That's not just a bad mood. That's the shadow reacting before you can stop it. Carl Jung called this projection. It's when you take the parts of yourself you've rejected and see them in someone else. You say, "She's so full of herself. He's so fake. They think they're better than everyone." But pause. What if that's not about them at all? What if the confidence you call arrogance is something you've denied in yourself? What if their freedom makes you uncomfortable because you haven't allowed it in your own life? The shadow doesn't just hide in shame. It hides in judgment. It hides in blame. It hides in that voice that says, "I would never be like that." But the more you judge, the less you see, because judgment creates distance. And distance keeps you from noticing that what bothers you in others often reveals what you haven't faced in yourself. Let that sink in. Think of someone who gets under your skin, not because they've done something truly harmful, but because something about them just irritates you. Ask yourself, what am I really reacting to? What part of me is being exposed right now? It might be something you were taught to suppress. It might be something you're afraid to admit you want. It might be a part of you that still lives in the shadow. But this isn't about guilt. And it's not about blaming yourself. It's about waking up. Because every time you project, you miss a chance to grow. And every time you pause and reflect, even just once, you pull another thread out of the darkness. You begin to see yourself clearly, not perfectly, but truthfully. And in that truth, there's power. The shadow isn't here to be destroyed. It's here to be understood. You don't need to fight it. You just need to stop running from it. Because the more you avoid it, the more control it has. But once you face it, it loses power. So how do you do it? You start small. You start by noticing. Noticing when your reaction feels too big for the situation. Noticing when a comment sticks in your chest for days. Noticing when you're triggered and asking why. That pause, that moment of honesty. That's the beginning of shadow work. Jung called this process integration. It's not about fixing yourself. It's about owning the parts of you that were never truly broken, only hidden. You feel anger, sit with it. Ask it what it's protecting. You feel envy, don't shame it. Ask what it's pointing to that you've denied yourself. You feel fear, look underneath it. It might be covering a part of you that's desperate to grow. Shadow work isn't a ritual. It's not a quick fix. It's a lifetime of learning to look inward, instead of lashing outward. And it starts with one question. What have I been afraid to see about myself? Write it down, say it out loud, give it a name. Because when you bring it into the light, it stops lurking in the dark. And the truth is, your shadow holds your power. That wild part of you you've buried. It's not your weakness, it's your missing energy. That rawness you've tried to smooth over. That's your fuel, your edge, your drive. And when you stop disowning yourself, you begin to move differently. Speak differently, live differently. You stop playing roles, you stop chasing approval. You stop fearing rejection. Because when you are whole, No one can use your missing pieces against you. Most people search for purpose by looking outside themselves, chasing titles, status, validation, trying to earn meaning. But Carl Jung believed, you don't find purpose by adding more. You find it by uncovering what you've buried, because the parts of you that you've rejected are often the parts you were meant to develop. That anger you suppress, maybe it's not rage. Maybe it's your voice, demanding to be used. That envy you hide, maybe it's not pettiness. Maybe it's a map to what you secretly desire. That fear you avoid, maybe it's not weakness. Maybe it's the wall between you and your next breakthrough. Your shadow is not random. It's not noise. It's coded guidance. And when you finally face it, you stop walking in circles. You stop second-guessing. You stop living someone else's story. Instead, you begin to align, to speak honestly, to act from depth, not performance. That's when people say, you've changed. But you haven't changed. You've just stopped hiding. You're not more now. You're finally you. And when that happens, you begin to attract what's meant for the real you, not the mask. You find relationships that don't drain, work that doesn't numb, peace that doesn't depend on silence. Because now, you're not fragmented. You're whole. But here's the question Jung would want you to ask. What part of yourself are you still afraid to meet? Because until you meet it, you'll never know what it's protecting, or what it's pointing you toward. And maybe, just maybe, that's the exact part of you that knows why you're really here.